And one of the most paradoxical consequences of shutting down our economy is, of course, that we become poorer. The more you shut down of the economy, the poorer we become. It follows. Now, what happens to poorer nations is they breed faster than richer ones. And this is quite irrespective of whether you have contraception, abortion, all these other ghastly measures that the 20th century introduced to us. Even if you don't have any of those, the only thing that stabilizes population in a beneficial and painless way, and it's the only way that's effective, is to raise the standard of living of the general population in the poorer countries. And what are we doing to them instead? We're saying, oh no, because of global warming, we can't let you make the emissions that got us out of poverty. You've got to remain in poverty. And the paradoxical effect of that is they will therefore continue to breed faster than we do. And the ultimate carbon footprint, if that's what worries these environmentalists, it doesn't worry me, but it does worry them, the ultimate carbon footprint of the world goes up if you pursue the policies of mitigation and closing down of economies which they advocate. So there is no scientific reason for any of this, and there is no economic basis for it whatever. It is the nearest thing I have seen to a completely lunatic policy since Hitler walked the earth, and I'm sorry to make that comparison again, but it is so startlingly bonkers that anyone should give this the time of day. It really is. It's very cruel to the working classes who depend for their jobs on us getting these decisions right. It's very cruel to the poor countries of the world who are being told you've got to remain poor in the name of saving a planet that frankly doesn't need saving. It's been here for 4.5 billion years so far. It's going to carry on just fine without us trying to save it, thank you very much. It was saved 2,000 years ago very efficiently by one man who also happened to be God, and it doesn't need saving again.
Gosh, get even more heretical what you're saying. Easiest show I've ever done. Back in a few moments on the Michael Coren Show. We'll see you. Last part of the show. I assume we'll still be here in 7 or 8 minutes because the world won't have ended in that period. Lord Christopher Monckton, who was science advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and we've heard him. I think the eloquence has been quite compelling on the issue of global warming. What I find frustrating is I know that some radio host who, full of self-importance, will say they've read a book about it, global warming's all true. They'll show a picture of a polar bear juggling and the ice is melting and isn't it sad? And somebody will say they've worked up north and it seems to be melting up there. So however, truth must still be expressed. Let me ask you this, then. I think this is a valid point. Why does it seem that the left embrace the global warming theories and the right reject them? That always worries me, because both sides can be wrong on issues. So it should, and I think it's very sad that what is essentially a scientific question should have become politicized. In Britain it's different. All parties have kind of gone along with the bedwetting theories. They've all said, oh yes, we're doomed, and the Conservative Party, which is nominally the right-wing party, though now it's kind of centre-left really, it has come out and said that, in fact, it's produced the stupidest document on climate change I've ever seen. It's even stupider than Al Gore's film. It's quite unbelievable how half-witted it is. So it isn't universal that it's right-left. Certainly it is true to say that the left are more enthusiastic about this worldwide than anyone else. But then, you see, they've got it wrong before. Let's take the DDT example, where 40 years ago, Jackie Kennedy read Rachel Carson's The Silent Spring. And the thesis of this book was that because of DDT and other chemicals we were pouring into the atmosphere, the world was going to be so grossly polluted that every species other than humankind would die, and then eventually we would die too, and it was all going to be terrible. And Jackie Kennedy read this and shivered and plucked at the sleeve of her husband, who was then President of the United States, and said, look, you've got to do something about this. We've got to save the planet from DDT. And so Kennedy appointed a friend of his who was an environmental nincompoop to take charge of the Environment Protection Agency. Result, unfortunately, they banned DDT. This was copied worldwide because the left got going and said, aha, we can show who's boss, we can ban DDT. And of course a lot of them were in league with people who were producing chemicals other than DDT, which they wanted to replace, so they were making money out of it. The usual unfortunate money, power story and glory story. So they banned DDT.
Now, DDT is, in fact, safe enough. You can eat it by the tablespoonful. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do that. It won't hurt you if you do. It's completely harmless to humans. It's completely harmless to bird life and animals. The only thing it's harmful to is the Anopheles mosquito, which is the vector that carries the falciparum parasite that causes malaria, and to the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which carries the yellow fever parasite. It's fatal, and really fatal, to both of those. And the guy who invented it, who was German, got the Nobel Prize because before DDT was introduced, 1 million people a year around the world, nearly all of them children, were dying of malaria. It was one of the biggest killers. DDT came along, and deaths from malaria fell to 50,000. We were on the point of wiping it out. When the left got in on the act, and it's exactly the same people, the Environmental Defense Fund, you know, people who've got hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, goodness knows where they get it from. Foreign governments, possibly. I don't know, I haven't looked, but it's certainly an alarming question. Are environmental movements being backed by China or India so that they won't have to compete with us for natural resources because we'll have shut our economies down? It's a question that the security services, I hope, are looking at, because it certainly worries me. But there was the Environmental Defense Fund. It came in and said, right, we're going to try and press for a ban on DDT. They succeeded. The number of deaths went back up from 50,000 a year to 1 million a year, and it stayed there for 40 years, while the likes of me were chirruping away saying, this is killing millions, it ought to be stopped, what on earth is the World Health Organization doing? And eventually, just 3 years ago, on the 15th of September 2006, Dr. Arata Kochi of the World Health Organization said, right, he said, in this field, politics usually predominates. Now we are going to take a stand on the science and the data. He ended the ban on DDT and declared that it would once again be the front line of defense against the mosquito.
40 million people died.
40 million children.
Because Jackie Kennedy read a silly book.
Yep.
And her foolish husband bought into it.
And then the entire international left came in on the act. And that was what did the damage. And so the problem is that you have this political faction which likes to show who's boss. That's the characteristic of the left. They are instinctive interventionists. And I know this is a little much of a political point, but it is unfortunately true that it was they who pushed the DDT ban. It was they who, to this day, will say that David Suzuki and others who advocated this ban, and David Suzuki to this day will tell you he regards this as one of the most successful campaigns he ever conducted. That killed 40 million people, nearly all of them children. And it took 40 years before this decision could be reversed. Why? Because we had to wait until all the people responsible for the original decision had either retired or died and were no longer in the way of doing the decent thing.
And because they thought it was harmful to people, to animals?
They didn't think any such thing. It was purely to show who was boss. There was,
really?
there was never any scientific case for this. And it's the same with global warming. There's no scientific case for this either. It's the same people trying to assert themselves in the same way, and this time they have succeeded yet again in getting the entire classe politique.
I wish we had another hour. Lord Christopher Monckton, thank you so very much indeed, really.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's been a real pleasure and a real joy.
All right.
Thank you so much for letting me sound off.
Emails, let them come. Take care. God bless. Goodbye.